Hi everyone, it's great to be here at the Furhat conference. I hope you would enjoy it too. In this presentation, I would talk a bit about why the face is so important for us in our communication with each other, and why I think that it's important for robots to also have a face. So there has been this recent surge in development of humanoid robots. You can see a few examples here on this slide. One interesting thing to note that they all have in common is that they all lack any face. And to me, it's not perhaps entirely clear why this decision was made. I think if these robots are supposed to work on their own in factories, I think it could, of course, make sense. But if they are supposed to interact with humans, as we can see in some of these pictures, I think it would be quite important for them to have a face. So compared to other animals, humans are quite unique in our ability to collaborate with each other, and the face plays an important role in this collaboration and coordination. So I think we can see the human face as an extremely important coordination device, and by that I mean a signaling device that allows us to coordinate and communicate with each other. And as we will see, both the appearance of the face and our perception of faces have been formed by the evolution of humans. For example, if we were not allowed to look at each other's faces, simple tasks such as carrying a table together or taking part in a multi-party dialogue that we can see in the pictures here would be much harder. So, for example, inferring where the other person is likely to start putting down the table, or inferring who is about to speak next or what they think about what you're telling them, relies on cues found in the face. So let's break it down and see what different things that the face actually communicates. So first, of course, the face has very clear facial features that provides the identity of the person, and we as humans are actually very, very good at using these features to tell different faces apart. Of course, with a face, you can do a lot of different expressions to express emotions or attitudes you might have towards the person you're talking to or what they are saying, and the intentions you might have. The gaze also plays a very important role. So the gaze, by the gaze, we can see what other people are attending to. Could be objects or could be other people. So it's also, of course, important for turn taking, to knowing who is supposed to speak next. It can also signal things like engagement. Is the person engaged or disengaged? And also social status, intimacy. We know, for example, if we look for too long at another person, it might be uncomfortable. But of course, it depends on the relationship you have to that person. Another very important feature in the face are the lips, and that helps us in speech perception. And many people might not think about this. We think perhaps that hearing impaired people need this, but actually everyone benefits from being able to read the lips, of course, especially in noisy situations. So our ability to recognize faces is very impressive, as I said. If we think about how many different people we meet during our lives and how similar they actually are. And our brains have developed a specific area called the fusiform face area, which has specialized in recognizing faces. And since this is so important for us, it has become maybe a little bit too trigger happy. As we can see in these pictures, we tend to see faces in everyday objects even. And research has actually shown that this fusiform face area gets activated even when looking at these kind of objects. And other research has shown that the area also gets activated, interestingly enough, in blind people when they are asked to touch 3D objects shaped like faces. So the brain specialization in face processing is also evident in how quickly we judge other people by their faces. In this specific study I'm showing here, they let people see a face for only an extremely short period of time, like 100 milliseconds, and then judge whether they trust the person or not. And interestingly enough, as this correlation graph shows, these responses have very good correlation with judgments that they made about the same person when they were shown the face and were allowed to look at it for as long time as they wanted to. So clearly we form our impression of trust extremely fast by looking at faces. But evolution has not just shaped our perception of faces, but also the appearance of them. So one example of that is the whiteness of the sclera, which is white in humans, as you can see in the pictures, but not so in many other species, such as apes. According to the cooperative eye hypothesis by Tomasello, this whiteness evolved so that it would be easier for us to read each other's gaze direction. This means that inferring the attention of other people clearly had a very strong evolutionary advantage, since it becomes much easier to cooperate if we can do that. And studies by Tomasello and others have shown that children typically develop this interest in the gaze very early on, whereas experiments on apes show that they do not show such an interest in the gaze of others. The importance of the face is also shown through the many studies on the differences between meetings in person and meeting over the telephone, showing that face-to-face meetings have many advantages, for example, in the development of trust. And of course, the COVID pandemic gave rise to a renewed interest in these kind of studies, where researchers were also interested in the difference between physical meetings and online meetings, where we can see each other's faces but only on a screen. So here is a study from 2022 published in Nature, and they let 600 participants try to generate creative ideas together, either in person or over a video link, as you can see in the picture. And the results showed, interestingly, that virtual pairs generated significantly fewer creative ideas than the in-person pairs. And the hypothesis in the paper is that the reason might be that when you stare at the screen all the time, not only your sort of visual scope, but also your cognitive scope becomes somewhat limited. So this shows that it's not just important to see each other's faces, but sharing the same space and being co-located is also very important. And this is, of course, also a strong argument for why for robots compared to virtual agents, for example, on whether you have an agent on a screen. So in this picture, we can see Furhat engaged in a game together with two users. They are sorting a set of cards, and they discuss together how they should be sorted. And in this setting, the robot can direct its gaze towards any of the two users. So, for example, ask a question, or it can look at the cards on the table so that users can infer which card it's talking about. And of course, this would be very hard to do with a virtual agent or a voice agent, as they would not be sharing the same physical environment. And what we also saw in this specific study was that humans conform quite strongly to the robot's gaze when it comes to multi-party turn-taking. So if the robot is looking at one of the participants, that person becomes much more likely to take the turn and speak next. And this is also true even if it's a non-dominant person that the robot is looking at. So this means that the robot can help to balance participation equality, for example, in an educational setting. This is another example of an experiment where we wanted to study joint attention more closely. So as you can see, the robot here was explaining a route on a map to a human, and we had 3 different conditions. So one with congruent gaze, where the robot was looking at the landmark it was referring to, but also 2 control conditions where the gaze was either incongruent, so looking at a different landmark while referring to it, or a fixed condition where it was just looking at the middle of the map. And since we asked the participants to draw the route on the map in front of them, we could measure exactly how quickly they were following along in the instructions. And the results showed that participants could follow the instruction much more quickly when the robot's gaze was indeed congruent with the landmark it was referring to. And I think this is interesting because we should remember that we never instructed the participants to read the robot's gaze. This sort of came natural to them. And here we did a somewhat similar study, but instead focusing on the robot's facial expressions and emotions in dialogue. So here the participants were asked to play this card sorting game that I mentioned earlier with the robot, but with cards that naturally evoke emotions. And we have an example here, as you can see. The human might say, "What do you think about picture 1? I think it looks really cool." And the robot might say, "The picture looks really beautiful to me. It's such an amazing sight." And then we use the large language model to determine the appropriate emotion the robot should have while expressing this, and then reflected that in the robot's facial expressions. And similar to the previous experiment, we compared 3 conditions. So we have one with congruent facial expressions with the emotions, one with more random expressions, and one with fixed, just neutral expression. And interestingly, the congruent facial expressions were not only rated more favorably by the participants, but they also performed better in the card sorting game. So this shows that the face not only can contribute to sort of a better perception of the robot, but also to better objective outcomes in a task. And here is finally another recent study that can be worth mentioning. In this study, we were investigating the use of social robots as hosts on self-driving buses. The idea here is, of course, that if there is no human to host on the bus, there is nobody to ask questions, and passengers might feel insecure in certain situations when there is no authority on the bus. So we wanted to see if a robot could have a similar role as a human conductor on the bus. And here we had 2 conditions. So we compared the robot, as you can see in the picture, to a disembodied agent, namely a smart speaker in the ceiling of the bus that they could talk to. Otherwise, the 2 systems were the same. And one of the analyses that we did was to transcribe and categorize everything that people said to each other and to the agent on the bus. And in general, we could see that the embodied agent, the robot, triggered much more interactions with the passengers than the disembodied ones. So passengers took more initiative to talk to it. And not only did the passengers ask more questions to the robot, they also followed up the robot's responses in a more social manner compared to when talking to the speaker. So they were more likely to say things like thank you or confirming what the information that they had received from the robot. So to conclude my presentation, I have argued that the human face is a very important coordination device in many different ways. Evolution has shaped its feature and our perception of it. And we have discussed a long range of communicative functions, including identity, trust, emotions, attitude, intentions, turn-taking, social status, etc. And I think that robots with faces will allow people to communicate and coordinate with them in a much more intuitive way compared to robots without faces or with very simplistic faces. And I would finally want to point out that this doesn't necessarily mean that we need to build robots that look exactly like humans or superhuman-like and photorealistic humans. I think the important thing are that the facial features match human facial features. So we can also have robots with more sort of cartoonish faces as long as they sort of have these kind of features. So with that, I would like to conclude and thank you very much for listening.